Hey, so guys, Rockskull here. In this video, I'm going to be ranking every cave on the island based on the difficulty, and then giving some tips on how to get through each cave. Let's get started with what I think is the easiest cave and work our way up. One general tip I want to give before we begin is to use an otter for each cave. These shoulder pets give insane installation depending on their melee damage stat, as well as being the only creature in the game that can hold multiple artifacts. Starting out, we have the lower south cave with its entrance right about here on the map. This cave has always been pretty easy for me, but since it is a cave, it can still be difficult in a few ways. The main important thing is to have a fairly strong tame that can fit in the cave. One you'll see me talk about a lot in this video is a Baryonyx, because of its super solid base stats along with versatility in the land and water. I recommend just getting a solid one bred up before you do any of the caves on this map, as it can be used in many of them. Anyway, for this cave in particular, it'll probably be the easiest for you, as the biggest threat to me is probably just the Arthropleura. These guys have massive recoil damage that can kill your tames pretty quickly, as well as a spit attack that can destroy your armor instantly if it hits your player. Your best bet is to use a ranged weapon like a crossbow or long neck rifle instead of melee fighting it, as they take 3x damage to any ranged weapon attacks. Other than that, the Araneos, Pulmoscorpius, Megalania, and Titanoboa are pretty easy to take out in this cave. There is a chance a Megalosaurus can spawn, which can be a bit scary, but if you got a solid Baryonyx, it can definitely handle it. Also, be a bit careful where you go, as there's this water section of the cave too with Sarcos and Piranhas that can be pretty dangerous. But you don't actually have to go through it at all if you just want the artifact. You can just use this cliff here to jump down straight to the artifact, which is in a room you have to crouch in. You can either bait the creatures in there out, or just chat it out and try to fight them yourself. Once the artifact is grabbed, crouch back out where you came, and just take a left to go up and out of the cave. You'll of course be fighting some more stuff on the way up taking this route, so be prepared. Next is the central cave, which I'd say is pretty much a copy of the lower south cave in a lot of ways, but actually shorter. The only main difference here is the introduction of the Onyx. These guys can be really annoying because they can give you Mega Rabies, which if not cured, will most likely kill your player. The only way to cure is by using a lesser antidote crafted in the Mortar and Pestle, Equisaddle, or Chemistry Bench. Have a couple of these with you in this cave with a berry, and it should be pretty dang easy to get through. Also, don't even bother with swimming in the water sections most of the time, as they're just big holes that can be death traps with a bunch of Sarcos and nothing of value. The upper south cave is next up here, and the main challenge in this one is a lot of underwater sections. You're going to need something that can be effective in the water and land like a Baryonyx, and a scuba tank or two. An important note about the Baryonyx, though, is that it actually cannot fit in certain sections at the beginning. If you have crowpod restrictions, you have to jump down the cliff and crowd that dude on the way back up after the artifact is grabbed. There will be a lot of Sarcos and Piranhas in the water sections, so be careful there for sure. Baryonyx can make easy work of everything in there, luckily, with their spinning stun attack. Land parts pretty much have everything you deal with in most caves, including the bats, so make sure you bring some lesser antidotes too, just in case. The final important thing for this cave is that it can be pretty easy to get lost if you're new, so make sure you have a map open up from the wiki or something before going through. Next we got the northeast cave, or what I like to call the Bear Cave. First, there's this short underwater section in the beginning that isn't too much of a hassle to get through, as there is no enemies. You definitely don't need scuba for it, just a somewhat solid swimmer like a berry. After that, you'll notice this is just a very vertical cave that kind of just spams bats everywhere, so remember to bring those lesser antidotes. It is possible to get to the bottom using the jump off at last second tech, or a parachute, but you'll have to fight a crap ton of bats at the bottom and on the way up, so beware. If you're doing the cave normally, just be careful not to fall in the gaps that are everywhere, and probably be on a dino that has some solid hops like a berry or a saber-tooth. Caverns of Lost Faith is a pretty easy underwater cave to me, especially now in ASA. I'd still just recommend a berry for this, with of course some scuba, since they don't have an oxygen stat and can deal with pretty much anything this cave throws at you. The cave in general has a lot less jellyfish that spawn than it used to in ASE, and things like Mosas or Tusos are super rare inside of here. The biggest threat now would probably be the Zivactinus, as their damage and healing can be massive. The great thing about the berry for this cave is that you can just skip past a lot of the creatures since they spawn so low. Even if things aggro, you can still just use a berry to constantly stun everything in this cave, including the Zivactinus, and go on any land sections to heal. The artifact room itself has a lot of glowy pits that can hide jellyfish and other creatures, so make sure you look closely before you just hop in and grab it. You can use something like a crossbow to damage things outside the water, or just from a distance while in the water to clear the area. The lava cave on the southeast part of the island is next here, and I have it so high up because the lava in it is honestly big scary. If you fall in it at all, it can pretty much be instant death, and your items will most likely end up being impossible to get back. The cave can also be fairly easy to get lost in like the upper south cave, so make sure you have some sort of map open if you're new. Main important thing to bring is grappling hooks, as the artifact is surrounded by lava, and you would have to do some scary parkour instead if grappling hooks aren't brought. Lots of bats spawn here too, so make sure you bring those lesser antidotes. Would recommend a ranged weapon as well, as you can lead creatures into the lava with the right angles. Next up we have the swamp cave, and this one just has a ton of super high level bugs and toxic gas all over the place. For the gas, you can either bring a couple of gas masks or a full set of scuba, and if you're playing without the crowpod restrictions, you can just easily use a Megatherium to clear clear this cave every time because of their bug buff. Otherwise, with restrictions, you may have to use something like a high level Beelzebufo or a Baryonyx instead, which will be a bit more difficult. It's still not the worst thing in the world. Also, a reminder that this cave is fantastic for loot mid to late game too. Make sure you remember that if you need good saddle blueprints or something. Next, we got the northwest cave in the snow biome, and this one has become more of a pain in the butt for me as time has gone on. The thing about this cave is that you are forced to be on foot because of its size, and it is really RNG. It can either be you hug the right wall straight to the artifact without you having to fight anything, or it spawns 20 high level bats in your path that kill you instantly. This means just in case you need really good armor, and a solid weapon of some sorts like a shotgun. Primitive stuff just won't do from my experience. Your main threats will be the bats, which you probably know by now are super tanky and have the ability to give you mega rabies. Make sure you got those lesser antidotes and healing brews. Another important thing is grappling hooks, as there are these parts of the cave that straight up insta-kill you if you fall in, and all the items you have get straight up deleted, which makes it even worse than the lava. Grappling can always be a bit weird, so be very careful doing this still, and make sure you know how the grappling mechanics work beforehand. The cave that gets the number 3 spot to me is the Caverns of Lost Hope. This cave kicks up the underwater creature difficulty to the max. It got a bit easier on the switch to ASA, but it still spawns super high level Mosasaurs, Tusoteuthis, Zivactinus, Megalodons, and Eels. All of these things have their own ways of messing you up, and are often super tanky. There are 2 ways you can take this cave to me. One is brute force, and the other is zooming by everything. For the brute force method, you're going to need one super strong squad of underwater creatures. Definitely do not underestimate the creatures that spawn here if you do this method though. With the addition of the Zivactinus, a squad of these can actually do super well in this cave. Megalodons and Tusos can also be decent if you want to use those. For the zoom past everything method, all you're going to need is an Ichthyosaurus, and a nearby bed spawn point with more Ichthyes. I'd also just recommend not bringing anything at all that's important. Make sure your Ichthy has good stamina and health with an imprint. And all you gotta do is stick to the top of the cave for the most part, and if you know the route, you should be able to grab the artifact in and out. This is super risky though, as one stun from an eel or a grab from a Tuso can be game over. That's why I recommend putting all your stuff away if you do this method. The most difficult artifact cave and second most difficult cave in the game to me, as most of you who played this game probably predicted, is the snow cave. This cave will really test your gamer knowledge of ARK, so be prepared for a long journey. This cave has super high level bears, Gigantopithecus, Perlovias, and direwolves. The temps here are super cold, so first make sure you have a good set of fur or 2 and a high melee damage otter. I'd also recommend campfires in case it gets too cold, and some sleeping bags for respawn points during the cave. If you don't have the cryopod restrictions, I'd highly recommend a Yudi and a Rex, as you can use the Yudi to fear roar any Perlovias and their mounts. A good statted Rex will handle anything in this cave with ease. If you do have the restrictions, your best bet I think would be to use a super good mate boosted berry pair, and maybe a Daedon with them. There's actually a surprising amount of fish in this cave, which heals the berry a crap ton, so it's definitely a solid option here. So make sure you have really good stats on them, and an opposite gender berry with you for a mate boost. To deal with the Perlovias, you'll need a bunch of grenades. The final, most difficult cave on the island to me is of course the Tek Cave. This is the cave you'll have to go through to get to the final boss, and it's so difficult some may consider it even harder than the final boss itself. The main thing about the cave you probably notice is that there is lava everywhere, and if you or any of your tames fall in, it's game over most likely. The creatures you face in this cave are no joke too, as on alpha difficulty with basic settings, you can get a ton of different creatures over level 600. These creatures vary from Microraptors, Baryonyx, Rexes, and Uranus. Things like Uranus and Carnos can honestly be one of your greatest fears here, as they can do massive knockback that can boop you into the lava. So make sure you watch the angle which you are fighting these guys in. The Microraptors and Perlovias can knock you off your tame too. These I find are best dealt with range attacks, like the Tek Rex saddle. The Tek saddle weapon is actually explosive and can get Perlovias out of their burrows too. If you're playing on an easier difficulty and don't have access to the saddle, you can just use explosives or a Udi's Furor to get them out. The biggest threats to me in this cave are the Gigas and the Karches though, which can spawn around level 70. If you know these guys in the wild, they can have some of the most insane stats in the game, so fighting them directly will be super tough and I wouldn't really recommend it. The best option if you see one is to lead it straight into the lava if possible with ranged weapons. Another very unique and tough feature to this cave is the 1-hour timer. Trying to do this in a limited time while also bringing all your creatures to the bottom is a huge challenge, especially with goofy ARK AI. Best tip I can give here is to make sure you have your dinos in multiple conga lines before you go in, and keep bringing them down as you go down. I'd recommend Theries over Rexes for the majority of your squad, as their maneuverability makes it a lot easier. For your character, give yourself some strong armor, and don't neglect the elements as this cave can get super hot, as well as super cold in the Overseer section. Bringing in an otter for one of your dino slots so you don't have to deal with the elements is something I wouldn't consider a bad idea either. And of course bring all the essentials like food, water, stews, and health brews. That's going to conclude my thoughts on every cave on the island. You can let me know in the comments what you think of this ranking, or maybe some bonus tips for a particular cave I missed. Thank you all for the support as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Rock skull. All I want to do is stream all night. Lobby full, rock skull. Never gonna play with me, but it's alright.